So Alex, thank you so much for joining me on Payments Unpacked TV. We've had the pleasure of working together for the last 12 months, but before we get too much into our conversation, I thought it'd be great if you could introduce yourself and just tell me a little bit about you.
I'm the General Counsel of the Payment Systems Regulator. I've been here just over 2 years now. Before then I was a competition lawyer and an economic regulatory lawyer. I've worked in private practice and in the public sector.
Fantastic. Well, with that experience, an edition called Smarter Regulation Specific Directions is bang on in terms of your experience and your role here at the Payment Systems Regulator. But just before we dig into that concept of a smarter regulator, I think it's really important that we make sure that everybody absolutely understands who the Payment Systems Regulator are.
I mean, it's partly we do what it says on the tin. We are the regulator for the UK's payment systems ecosystem. What that really means is we are looking out for the consumer, the businesses that use payments, for the interests of competition, innovation, and we very much believe in supporting the creation of a world-leading payments ecosystem in the UK.
So with that backdrop and the use of the word regulator, you must regulate somebody. Who do you regulate?
So we do. Part of our role is directly overseeing the payment systems. So in real terms, that means the likes of Visa, MasterCard, Bacs, faster payments, linked with the cash machines. But we actually have a broader remit, which is about being able to direct the behaviour of participants in that payment system. And that's a far broader web of businesses.
Perfect. Okay, now you've talked about who you are as a regulator and who you oversee or who you regulate. What responsibilities do you have? What have you got in your toolbox?
Primarily, we focus on promoting competition, promoting innovation, and protecting the needs of service users. Now, they're three standalone objectives, but they're really complementary because innovation is for the good of consumers and businesses. Competition drives value for money and quality, so they're complementary in that sense.
Perfect. We talked about in the title of this video a specific direction. Now I know that specific directions are something you've got in your toolbox, but I think before we can even think about revoking a specific direction, we've got to think about what even is a specific direction. So what is, I'll call it an SD, let's use an acronym. What is an SD and why do the PSR use them?
It's a great question, and I might even stand back a little bit further and say, what is the toolbox generally? So we have powers to intervene. We have requirements put on us to respond to requests, actually, from participants if they are not happy with certain terms that they're given. And we have enforcement powers and information gathering powers. In terms of intervention, we may conduct a market review or we may set up a policy program. If we find that there is a need for change, we have the power to direct payment systems operators or participants in the systems. And an SD is one type and a GD is the other. Now, GDs are called general directions. I mean, I hate them. I would just call them all different types of directions. But a general direction is generally applied to a group. Specific directions are aimed at a specific entity or a specific group of entities. So there's a little bit of an overlap. But really, they're a power to require firms to do something or not to do something. And there's a degree of flexibility in what we can ask them to do. Obviously, it's subject to public law and anxious scrutiny that we're doing the right thing for the right reasons.
Okay, so that's what a specific direction is, and that might be why you use them. Let's get down to the meat of this conversation. If I was to ask you, how did the PSR originally use specific directions in terms of in relation to the provision of retail payment infrastructure here in the UK?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, there's a number of specific directions that are similar in this sense, so I'm going to talk about them broadly, but of course each one is focused on a specific need. We at the Payment Systems Regulator wanted to ensure that the infrastructure, that the absolute fundamental plumbing of the payments ecosystem was right. And when I say it was right, it was capable of delivering what was necessary for growth, competitiveness, innovation, resilience. So a number of these interventions were focused around the procurement of, and the maintenance of infrastructure. Relatedly, we required infrastructure contracts, the supply of that infrastructure, to be competitively procured. The reason why the PSR felt that competitive procurement was important is it's that process of competition, of tendering and getting bids, that really drives the incentives for firms to offer the best they can in terms of quality, value for money, and that there was a sense of longevity in the deals that they would be able to evaluate. So these directions required that competitive process to be driven by the payment systems operator.
Thank you for that. So I'm now going to twist a little bit, because we've talked about the role and the purpose of the PSR as a payment systems regulator. We've talked about the regulatory instruments it might be able to use. We've got those in our mind, and we're going to talk about being a smarter regulator for the rest of our time together. But it just begs me to ask the question, given everything you've said, why has the PSR taken the decision to revoke several specific directions over the past few weeks?
So there's been three which are, I suppose, are interesting in terms of the themes that they give rise to. Standing back, any regulator being proportionate and responsible and adhering to better or smarter regulatory principles should never have rules on the books that are no longer adding value. All regulators must review their statute book or their instrument book periodically. Some directions time out. Others, we would undertake an active review, and others, participants or those subject to the requirements may request that they are scrutinised to see if they are working. So that process also arose in relation to these directions. We actively looked at whether or not the terms were appropriate today. Now, they were imposed substantial time ago, at a time when the policy imperatives may have been ever so slightly different, not in terms of the detail, but also the facts of the landscape commercially, economically, are different to they are today. And the PSR looked very carefully at that, weighing the principles of what good competition looks like, the importance of resilience, the really important nature of infrastructure for our ecosystem, and then looking at whether the directions are fit for purpose, whether they add value, or whether in fact they add costs and burden and should be reasonably revoked.
So we've talked about the big, bold decision to revoke these important instruments that the PSR have used. Given that's been done and we've seen revocation of the three specific directions, what do you think the impact's going to be? And things move quite slowly in the payments world, so I'm thinking about impact in the short term and the long term.
Yes, there's a lot to unpack there, and I think it's interesting that you were talking about it being big and bold. I think this is it's a strong decision, it's a carefully taken one, and it's strategically focused on what is right for the UK economy. I think it's an iterative evolution of a regulatory landscape, so it's not revolution necessarily, it's evolution. In terms of the impacts that you refer to, we're of course strategically focused on the national payments vision. Like the Treasury, we want to see competition, security, and innovation in a world-leading payments ecosystem in the UK. While we took these decisions, you might have called them bold, I would say that these are careful decisions taken with a clear focus on the goal of economic regulation, perhaps evolution rather than revolution, because we're not throwing out the concept of competition, but by removing the specific requirements about the process of achieving infrastructure in terms of tendering, we've created the necessary space and flexibility for Bacs and faster payments in relation to SD2 and 3 to ensure that they can achieve the right outcomes that the national payments vision is looking for them to achieve. And similarly for SD4, which is about link, we've removed a requirement that didn't appear to be the best way of achieving the goals of getting the right infrastructure in the right way. So the longer term impact should still be a more competitive ecosystem that is the right technology at the right value for money that benefits service users and ultimately consumers.
Fantastic. I think if I hear rightly and correctly what you've told me, that this feels not just an isolated, siloed decision. It feels that it's reflecting a much broader direction of change in the payments landscape. Is that true?
So I'm glad you raised that, because I should have explained that when we took our decisions, we were also very mindful of the role of the Bank of England, for example. Although we are an independent economic regulator of payment systems, we do not operate in a vacuum, and we never did. So we're very mindful of the FCA's agenda. We work carefully with the Treasury. We are aligned in terms of what we want to achieve. And although there's a phrase, smarter regulation. I'm so old in the tooth that I remember when it was called better regulation. So it's not new to me, but we are leaning into that very important growth agenda and being a pragmatic, proportionate, and reasonable regulator that is looking at what's right for now based on the commercial and economic landscape.
Alex, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on being a smarter regulator. This is wrapping up on our time together, so I really appreciate the time you've taken out to talk to us today. If you want to know more about the PSR, you'll find them at psr.org.uk. And Alex, I'm sure you'll be happy for people to reach out to you on LinkedIn, so folks should get in touch if they want to.
Thanks very much.